So good morning all. Thank you all for joining. It's 11:02, so like I said, we will start the presentation. Firstly, thanks for taking the time to join our next in our webinar series events from GridServe on all things salary sacrifice. This month's episode, me and my colleague Seb are going to be discussing everything about how to manage employees' changes and what that sort of head title can mean and understand for different businesses, and how we can help advise and protect businesses when they incorporate these sort of schemes. So first off, apologies, just realised my microphone's muted. But just to start off, if at any point during the presentation there's any questions that anybody asks or can think of, please chuck them straight away in the Q&A section you should see on the top of your banner. They'll be monitored throughout the duration of this presentation, and we'll do our endeavour best to answer all questions at the end. So don't feel like you have to wait. Please chuck them in as and when you do think of them. But briefly, what we're going to do is obviously just a quick introduction into who GridServe are, maybe new to yourselves on new people attending in terms of what we do as a business, and just a very brief sort of recap and overview from our last webinar about what is salary sacrifice. We'll then go into some depth and detail about the common changes to employee circumstances and what you can do as a business and how we help protect that at GridServe within our salary sacrifice scheme. We've also got some pricing examples to show you, just to really highlight the value of what this scheme does and how it can benefit businesses and how much saving ultimately it can provide with this level of cover. And then, as I mentioned, any questions at the end, we will recap and cover for you.
Ben, you're on mute again.
Apologies. I don't know why it keeps doing that, but I will keep an eye. Thank you, Seb. So as you can see on our screen, this is a bit of information of who we are at GridServe. So if you've never heard of GridServe before, this is a snapshot here from our CEO, Toddington. So GridServe, as it's stated, is a tech-enabled international sustainable energy business. So our whole purpose and ethos as a company is to move the needle on climate change. And the way we do that is from sustainable solar farming, which we then provide eco-sustainable energy into our core of our business, which is through our GridServe Highway with our electric network charging across the UK. And we also have a GridServe car leasing division, which is the division that myself and Seb are in, where we help and aid businesses of all shapes and sizes to incorporate a greener, more electric fleet. And that can be down to changing their existing fleet of vehicles, whether it's incorporating schemes such as this, a salary sacrifice, as well as obviously having an online team dedicated to assisting private individuals with their personal needs as well. So an introduction into who we are. My name's Ben. I'm one of the business development managers here at GridServe. So I've been with the company for just under a year. Been in the automotive sector for around 6 to 7 years now, and recently sort of been delving into the salary sacrifice market for electric vehicles for the last 3 years. It's something I'm very passionate about moving the needle on climate change and making a real difference. Joining as well is my colleague Seb. Seb, if you want to give a brief introduction to yourself.
Yeah, hi, good morning all. As Ben mentioned, my name's Seb. I am a counterpart for SAFRA UK as a BDM with Ben. I've been with GridServe for 18 months now, and previous to that, I've got a fair amount of knowledge in EV charging and the kind of infrastructure and installation side of things. And previous to that, I've been working for a company called Navuna Vehicle Solutions, who were previously Hitachi. So I've got about 15 years experience in all things charging and car leasing. So yeah, very good to meet you guys.
Thank you, Seb. So just to sort of recap, if you did attend our first webinar last month, or if you haven't had a chance to maybe watch it, it is available on demand on our website for all our webinar events we have or will be hosting in the future. But just to sort of recap for people, what is salary sacrifice? Because we're finding more and more, myself and Seb, in the market, that it's something that, even though it's been around for some considerable time, it's still becoming quite a new topic for businesses who've never heard of it before. And the reason for it is the ever, emerging and rapidly growing electric market, which within the next decade will be the new norm. They're here to stay. So salary sacrifice, as it pretty much shows you on your screen, it's a HMRC-backed government benefit that allows employees to take up a portion of their pre-tax salary for a non-cash benefit. So in summary, it's very, very similar to similar schemes that may have already been incorporated within your business or you already offer, such as cycle to work scheme, childcare vouchers, salary sacrifice pensions, for example. It works in the same manner in the sense that you're deducting a portion of your salary before the tax man makes their deductions. Because you're doing so, that tax then at source means you will pay less income tax and less national insurance. And ultimately, that gives you a lower net cost. So in effect, the more tax you pay, the bigger the saving. But even if you're at a 20% taxpayer rate, you're effectively going to be getting a 20% saving available on all electric vehicles on the scheme. So that's pretty much what salary sacrifice is. It's great for a business to incorporate. It's great for your team to have in terms of giving back to those individuals. It helps attract and retain the best staff in the market that you're looking for and also wanted to keep. But it's also good for the green image of a business towards their own ESG goals. You know, companies are always thinking, how can they be greener? Some businesses don't even have fleets of vehicles. So this is a great initiative for companies to use to encourage not only their staff to drive electric, but they're encouraging them by giving the option for them to store something at such a considerably cheaper rate than the traditional, you know, purchase or lease markets that are available. Now, with salary sacrifice, it's very common to ask, you know, what is in the package? A lot of people assume because it's a car, it is just a car that you get, very similar to a normal leasing market, but that is completely the opposite of what's included. Within the total cost you get on any salary sacrifice scheme, and with our scheme in particular, obviously you have the monthly rental, which will be for the vehicle, and it's on a brand new electric vehicle. You get your monthly inclusion of comprehensive motor insurance. So that includes for yourself as the driver, and you can add up to 2 additional drivers from the same household. So if you've got a partner, spouse, or children you would like to be insured to drive the vehicle, they can. That insurance also, just so you know, does cover business use as well as standard if need be. You also have a maintenance package. So the vehicle is fully maintained throughout the duration of the contract that you agree to have between 2 to 4 years. So any regular service intervals, an MOT booking cost if applicable, depending on when you take the lease, it could be 4 or 5 years. And, you know, wearable items such as tires or punches, for example. Breakdown cover is included as standard as well. And as I mentioned, tyre and windscreen is included. But the great thing about our policy, with us being an EV infrastructure business, we have, you know, a large infrastructure of chargers on the GridServe highway that you get 3 months free access to for every person that orders a vehicle on our scheme. So it allows you to kickstart that movement into EV without having to worry about a delay, for example, to include a home charger. You can just get on the road, use our charging at no cost for 3 months. And one part that we're going to discuss in detail is the lifestyle protection. So this is the aspect about what happens if something were to change in my circumstances, because obviously, ideally, when you commit to something like this for 2 to 4 years, you don't envisage anything happening or changing within your future, but things do happen in life that we can't predict. So we've obviously designed something that allows people a bit of fluidity without a detriment in terms of financial cost to the scheme. So when we talk about employee circumstances, then what do we actually mean by that? And generally in the market world, it's often referred to as risk. It can sound quite daunting and quite scary, but it effectively is what is the exposure to businesses as well as employees if things change. Now, there are many, many providers out there in today's market that offer salary sacrifice schemes. And generally the common theme is, you know, what sets everybody apart from everybody else. And this generally is the key aspect, is how protected are we as a business? So there's a lot of providers out there that have different varying approach to their risk, and we'll sort of discuss on the next slide a bit more detail on that. But there's different levels of risk to you as an employee or to an employer on what could potentially you be liable for at certain situations, depending on how extensive the cover is. So when we say about employee circumstances, we're generally referring to those scenarios that if things change, it might require the vehicle having to go back early. And what we're going to discuss is, you know, how can we protect everybody involved with those scenarios, and what does GridServe include? Now, when we go into sort of risk protection policy, before we sort of dive into what GridServe includes, it's good to know where we generally sit within the market, because like I mentioned previously, there are a wide variety of different protection schemes on different salary sacrifice providers. Now, one of the most expensive but very low risk, there are a few schemes out there that allow options where, after 6 months of having the vehicle, you can return the car with no charge potentially, if, for example, you're leaving the company. The problem for this, though, is it is very, very expensive in the market. There's no set cost provided by these sort of providers because it is based on the car in question. But generally speaking, because it is the most expensive, the likelihood then of people actually using the scheme within a business is very, very low. So even though there's a great benefit of, well, if I need to return the vehicle at some point, I'm fine, it's very unlikely anybody's going to order a car in the first place, which unfortunately then negates the whole purpose of the scheme. The idea is to provide the scheme for your staff to use and for people to benefit from getting an electric vehicle at a more affordable rate. So if we're counteracting that with a very, very expensive protection cover, then it, like I mentioned, negates the whole purpose of it. A moderate risk, which is where GridServe Car Leasing and probably the majority of the top 10 lease companies who provide this cover you for, sits pretty much in the middle. It's good for both employers and employees, mainly for employers in terms of the level of risk that is covered. It's still very extensive, which I'll go into detail what it includes shortly. But the main thing is that it's a very, very reasonable cost for the employees. So by that, I mean that it's not at a financial detriment for them to be able to take advantage of the scheme by having this protection. And generally, the sort of get out clause on those moderate schemes are generally what's known as a 3 months or half of the remaining rentals, whichever is cheapest. So at any point during the contract, if the contract needs to be terminated early, it just requires what's known as a 3 months worth of rental payment to finish that. The highest risk option, which is generally obviously the absolute cheapest, is extremely high risk. So generally it doesn't provide cover for any scenario. And what that means is that if, a vehicle needs to be returned early for whatever reason it may be, the general rule of thumb is 50% of what's outstanding on the contract needs to be paid. And we've got some pricing examples to show you as a comparison, just to show you the true cost of what that is. In terms of that 50%, it's a very traditional cost of what you would probably see in the normal leasing market for personal or business leases. So going into GridServe's risk protection policy and what it actually includes. So here's a snapshot of some key aspects that we have covered. So if somebody was to take a career break or an international secondment or transfer within their business, long-term sickness is covered. So if somebody is continuously off for 21 consecutive days or more, it is deemed as long-term sick to the financial lender we work with on this scheme. If somebody was to lose their license, reduction in hours, redundancy, retirement, early termination of their employment, for example, if you were to dismiss somebody, these aspects are all covered within our risk protection policy, which is included as standard on our scheme with every vehicle that's available on there. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, in terms of the costs and where they sit, got a couple of scenarios to show you. So if an employee has a vehicle for less than 3 months, so we're talking pretty much very, very early stages, they've had the car delivered, and within 3 months of having that car delivered, because of the scenarios that you can see in front of you, they need to return the vehicle early. Because it's so early on in the contract, there is a larger payment, because the idea is that somebody probably shouldn't have to return a vehicle that early on within their agreement. But if they do, then 50% of what's left is required to pay to terminate a contract that should have been for 3 years, but it's only served 40 days, for example. As you can see there, on the long-term sickness, there is nothing to pay. So if somebody is continuously off for more than 21 consecutive days, then that is deemed as long-term sick and there is no payment required. Our view is that if somebody is off long-term sick, there's a lot of other financial worries potentially. So taking that off the table is just one less headache, which makes life a lot easier. But traditionally in the market with salary sacrifice, somebody may want to potentially cancel a contract, 3 or more months after having the vehicle. They've had it for a year potentially or 2 years. And the option is, okay, I'm changing jobs potentially or whatever it may be. Then the 3-month option does kick in, which basically means they just pay 3 months of their rental or 50% of what's left, whichever is the cheapest. And one key thing to highlight as well is there's nothing also to pay if somebody was to lose their license for medical reasons or obviously suffered a death. Now, that is obviously the traditional aspect of what the cover includes. That is the protection in detail. There are other avenues that can be explored. So depending on the size of the business, generally, the bigger the headcount, the more possibility. But if somebody was to leave the business and they still had a year remaining on the vehicle, there could be the potential that if somebody else within the company would be willing to maybe take that vehicle on for the remainder of the contract. It doesn't require any admin costs to do so. There's no payments for the employee leaving to pay to terminate, because all that's being done is just a change in the payroll deduction from employee A to employee B. And generally find for a lot of businesses, this is a really popular option because a lot of people want to transition to EV. Some are a bit scarce to do so, maybe for 2, 3, or 4 years. So if there's an opportunity for somebody to maybe have a vehicle for 6 months, a year, to sort of see how it goes, and as long as obviously the numbers work for them, we see more uptake in that value for people to sort of delve into the electric car market for the first time for 6 months to experience it. And obviously there isn't anything out there that allows you to do that. So there is that possibility, if you do have a scheme with us, that if there's somebody internally within the business that could be willing to take on a leavers vehicle, or for whatever reason somebody wanted to hand back a vehicle early, there is that possibility as well. Now, there's one aspect of cover which isn't highlighted here that my colleague Seb's going to take over and talk to you about. It's one of our key USPs within our schemes, which is all about parental cover. So it's more of a prominent topic compared to these. So I'll hand over to Seb, who's just going to discuss our parental cover in a bit more detail.
Yeah, no, well done, Ben. Let's talk about parental cover. So this is a very talked about topic within salary sacrifice, and employees take up. There's been a question that's been asked for 10, 15 years now, is what happens if I go on maternity leave or paternity leave? What happens? And the main risk from an employee's perspective is it's all well and good until you go on statutory parental pay. So I'll call it SPP from now on. It's a bit of a mouthful. So if you go on SPP and you're being paid less than national living wage, ultimately car goes back in most scenarios. There's not too many bits of cover that I can think of in previous jobs that would cater for parental leave. The really good thing about our parental leave, and why we kind of felt it deserves its own slide, is we've got a way to keep new parent in the vehicle, because who would have thought parents still need a vehicle to transport children? So in terms of what we do is, when you go on parental leave, or when you know what date it's going to be, the payment is 3 months worth of rental from the offset. Now, whether or not your business decides to take it all in one chunk, it may be that they decide to do it over 2-3 months or whatever. It may be they decide not to at all. But ultimately, there's 3 months to pay. And what that does is it covers you for the vehicle for either 12 months worth of rental, or whenever you come back to work, whatever's the quickest amount of time. Which ultimately means that once you've made that 3 months worth of payment, there's nothing to pay for the next 12 months from an employee perspective, apart from the insurance of the vehicle, which is slightly unattached to the actual vehicle. So there's still that to pay, but obviously it's a lot less than previously. So what that means is, despite you being on SPP and you being paid less than national living wage, because you're not paying for the vehicle, you absolutely can keep the vehicle. And this has proved to be extremely competitive when it comes to our own risk protection, because it's something that has been heavily debated. It's something that happens a lot. People do have kids. It's what happens in life, and you can never account for when that might happen as well. So that's something that we're very proud of, that we can keep parents in vehicles going forward. So hopefully that makes sense. Try to kind of simplify it as much as possible. If you've got any questions, chuck them in the Teams, and we can try and reword it and help you understand a little bit more. So really appreciate your time on that one. Should we go on to the next slide?
Yeah, and just to highlight on the parental cover for everyone is, like Seb's mentioned, it's basically effectively pausing any deductions for up to 12 months. Now, the great thing with our parental cover as well is you can kick that in at any point. So obviously there's so many different variations of businesses out there that have different parental cover. Some do SPP from the offset, some do full pay for maybe 4 months. So, if you know that you're going to have full pay potentially for 4 months, you can kick this in month 5. It doesn't have to be straight from the offset. So it allows you to work around what your parental cover pay is within your business, just to highlight that. But moving on to some pricing examples, over to yourself, Seb.
Super, thank you. Yeah, so Ben touched on this earlier, the 3 months versus half of mainly rentals that you would have to go through on a personal lease, which is astronomical. So what we will do is we'll go through a Mini Cooper. So our price net for salary sacrifice, dependent on age and age, address and things like that for insurance. So we put up a price of 371, which I believe was the price we talked about last webinar. So ultimately, there's nothing to pay upfront wise. There's no processing fees involved. Your early termination fee, as long as Ben mentioned, it's past that 3-month period, regardless of whether it's month 4 or month 30, your early termination fee is £1,100. So with regards to that, of course, if you get very into the term and you're at month 35 out of 36, we're obviously not going to charge you 3 months. It'll be half a month of rental, but that gives you a good idea as to where we stand. It doesn't tend to change until you get to that last bit of the lease. So if we go on to the next bit, PCH, this is like for like. So we've taken it back to as similar to salary sacrifice as we can, with upfront payments and so forth. So regardless of when you are looking to to terminate your lease, you've still got your upfront payment that you'd end up having to pay anyway, your processing fee as well, which is all lost because you paid that upfront. And ultimately, you're looking at half of mainly rentals, which is just shy of eight grand. Of course, that full transparency, that obviously gets cheaper the more you go into your lease. So it's gives you an idea of where you stand to start with. That will reduce, but you're looking at a saving regardless of around £6,800. You can see there that you're absolutely protected in a great way for anything that comes. And unfortunately, circumstances do change. I've seen PCH customers chop vehicles back in and get stung. So good place to be. If we go on to the next slide, please, Ben.
Yeah, and just to let everyone know, the pricing example we've shown you here is based on if somebody was 3 months into a 3-month contract, so that they're past that 3-month threshold. So the saving that Seb's discussed and showed you is based on if somebody was 3 months into a personal lease or 3 months into a salary sacrifice, based on our offering for the Mini. As you can see, it's over 6,000. The next example is on the same car, but we're looking at it halfway through that contract, so at 18 months.
Thank you, Ben. So again, you can see, as I mentioned, nothing changes in terms of the price for salary sacrifice. And it gets a little bit cheaper on the PCH side. So as I say, it reduces as and when the months go by. You're still looking at, saying goodbye to your upfront payment. And bear in mind that most upfront payments aren't 1 month upfront. They're usually 3, 6, 9, potentially even 12. So, that could be a big chunk to say goodbye to as well. But from 18 to 36 months, based on it being done in month 18, you're looking at £4,642 on the nose, which gives you a saving of about 3.5k. We say saving, but ultimately it's something you don't have to part with, and that can make that decision quite easy to make when you've got a small amount to pay. So next slide, please. So just a recap really onto employers and employees. The key takeaways of the presentation is, for an employer, when you're looking at a scheme, and the main topic is always what happens if one of my employees leave. The key thing is making sure that you get a fine balance between the risk and the reward for the employee. So, have a good conversation with suppliers or potential suppliers and really kind of hash that out, because yes, it's all well and good to have risk-free, but ultimately it's your employee that pays the price, and you don't really want to be promoting a scheme that's seen as uncompetitive. I've seen that happen before in my experience, and the scheme dies before it's even gone live. But ultimately as well, you don't want to be completely, taking all the risk and giving your employees a really cheap vehicle. You need to be able to counteract that into something that you're very comfortable with. And as an employee, whatever scheme that your employer has, that's the first thing you need to ask, is the question of what happens if I do leave. Of course, nobody expects to leave their business when they take one of these vehicles up. It happens though, and you need to make sure that you're covered, make sure that it meets your needs, make sure that the reasons are there. And as Ben went through, we've got lots of reasons as to, reasons you can get out of the vehicle. You just need to make sure that you're fully covered in terms of, okay, reasons, rather than, I'm leaving the business. Okay, that's not quite the reason, so it's 50% of the outstanding rentals. Just do some homework, if you like, on that. Really have a look at it. But versus PCH, as we discussed on the last webinar, it's extremely strong and competitive. So
perfect. Thanks for that, Seb. And that's pretty much everything to it. In terms of what our risk protection is at GridServe, where it sits in the market. I hope obviously it was informative enough to give you a bit of an insight, because the what happens if my employees move or change is quite a large topic to go over. It, like Seb mentioned, it's the biggest area of concern that people have. So I haven't seen any questions come through. So if at any point anybody attend would like to ask any, please do drop them in. But in the meantime, myself and Seb have got a couple of common questions we do get relating to this topic. First off being, who is liable for the car? So effectively businesses worry, what if it gets damaged, if it's not up to scratch, who's liable for this bill? So ultimately the individual who actually takes the agreement, so the employee, signs a contract to make them aware they are liable for the vehicle. So they're liable for all charges, costs, so speeding fines, anything that comes through, parking restrictions, but any damage done to the car they are liable for. The way it works is obviously the agreement financially is between the business and the financial lender, and then said business is effectively sub-hiring that down to the employee with the contract that we provide for you, so they're for them to sign to say they are liable for it. How the business obviously takes that deduction if there is a charge, obviously is usually from salary deductions, but again, it's at a business discretion on how they want to do that. So we're not saying you have to do it by the black and white on the book of what the contract says. You can make it adaptable to what works best for you, basically. But that is who is liable for the vehicle, and the employees are fully aware of that before signing up. Another common question, if you wanted to have a go, Seb, as you mentioned about the the parental cover aspect.
Yeah, so if you go on parental leave for a year, or however long you go out for, does it prolong your lease? Short answer is no. You come back to work and you just carry on paying whatever it was until the agreed lease ends. So there's no, you're not going to have another contract for another 12 months or whatnot. That ultimately still ends the time that you agreed with us and our funder. So no issues there.
Perfect. And last one is, how do I know if I'm eligible? So a lot of people think there's potential restrictions on if you can be eligible for salary sacrifice. And with our scheme, if your employer is to enroll our salary sacrifice scheme with you, everybody is eligible. It all comes down to your earnings. Now, the benchmark for salary sacrifice is, because it's a deduction pre-tax, so pre any taxman sort of deductions to be made, then the overall deduction just can't take you down minimum wage. So even if you work part-time, doesn't matter. If you earn enough to not take you below minimum wage, you're eligible. Obviously your employer may decide to put restrictions, but we always advise to open it up to everybody, because that's the whole purpose of the scheme, is to open it up to everybody that can use it. You just may have more or less options compared to others because of where your earnings may sit, or based on how much you take home after tax, for example. So but everybody is eligible. It is just down to your your gross salary, and just making sure you don't get deducted below that.
Sorry, Ben, you're on mute.
Apologies, I don't know why that keeps doing it. But if anybody would like to reach out directly, on the screen now is mine and Seb's direct email. We also have a direct line and a direct salary sacrifice mailbox. So as you can see on the screen, salarysacrifice@gridserve.com. So if you've got any further questions, want to know more about the scheme, or maybe even just jump on a call with myself or Seb just to discuss it in a bit more detail, appreciate we've only ever gone over one part on today's webinar. A key one to keep out for, though, is our next salary sacrifice webinar event. So we do have a web page with the previous event we held last month, which is available to watch and record, as will this one. But the one we will be hosting next month is a really hot topic. It is all about used EVs. Used electric vehicles is becoming a bigger market as more vehicles come to market in terms of offering, and we're at that life cycle now where those vehicles a couple of years old that were brand new are now starting to come available. So we at GridServe have actually started offering used vehicles on salary sacrifice for electric cars. It's seeing a very large uptake in terms of offerings and affordability. So the reason we wanted to incorporate it was to, you know, make things more affordable than ever for people, because, you know, electric cars can be expensive, just like everything at the minute. It seems to be going up. Salary sacrifice is a great way to take away those high costs, but we appreciate on new vehicles, it all comes down to what's available in the market at the time. But with used, it allows pretty much the majority of vehicles to come within a very comfortable budget for all varying, you know, in terms of earnings and pay grades. So if you'd like to obviously attend that webinar next month, sign up on our page to be registered for the next event, where we will shortly announce obviously when that will be hosted by myself and Seb. But if you would like to reach out and discuss more about it in detail, please do, because like I said, we are offering it available on salary sacrifice as well as business leasing for used EVs as well. And I believe that is everything to it. So thank you all for attending. Like I said, if you want to reach out, please do get in touch, and hopefully we will see you all at the next event in the next month's time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate your time.